Imagine your car stalls out on the highway. Um, the engine is smoking, the tires are completely shot, and you are just totally exhausted.
Oh, yeah. Absolute worst nightmare scenario.
Right. And a mechanic pulls up to help. But instead of popping the hood or, I don't know, offering you a ride, he hands you a 600-page college textbook on theoretical physics and says, read this, it will fix your car.
I mean, you would think the guy was completely out of his mind.
You would. It sounds insane. But today, we are looking at a first-century leader who faced a room full of people whose spiritual engines were smoking and stalling. They were completely burned out.
Yeah, and the solution this leader offered was, well, the ancient equivalent of handing them that theoretical physics textbook.
Welcome to Reformed Thinking. I am thrilled to jump into today's deep dive, where we are looking at early Christian pastoral leadership, this concept of reflective practice, and the structure of local church life.
And we are seeing all of this primarily through the lens of the biblical book of Hebrews, with a quick look at James later on.
Our source material today is Derek Tidball's book, Ministry by the Book. So have you ever felt spiritually burned out, fatigued by external pressures, or worried that you aren't making progress?
I think everyone hits that wall at some point.
Yeah. Well, this deep dive looks at how a first-century leader addressed a group of people feeling that exact same way and offering a surprisingly counterintuitive solution. Okay, let's unpack this.
Sounds good.
Before we look at the specific problems faced by this ancient church, we first need to understand the modern educational framework our source uses to analyze the text.
Right, which is this concept called reflective practice.
Yeah, reflective practice, what is that really?
So most professions today encourage reflective practice as a superior way of learning. It shifts the focus away from just dumping information into someone's brain.
Like rote memorization.
Yeah, rote memorization. The idea comes from educational theorists like Joy Amulia, who define reflection as an active process of witnessing your own experience.
Witnessing it, so like stepping outside yourself.
Precisely. You take a deliberate step back to examine the experience rather than just living through it. You direct attention to your own actions to figure out what is actually happening.
Okay, that makes sense. It becomes the basis for purposeful, intentional learning.
Yeah.
I think about it like an athlete watching game film on Monday morning.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
On Sunday, they are just running plays. They are reacting to the defensive line, they are taking hits, and they are caught up in the adrenaline of the stadium.
Right, they are too in the weeds.
Yeah. They don't have the perspective to understand why a play failed. But on Monday, they sit in a quiet room, watch the tape, and witness their own experience from a third-party perspective.
They see that they missed a block because, their footwork was off by 2 inches.
Right. So how does a modern educational concept like this map onto a first-century letter?
Well, it maps incredibly well because the author of Hebrews isn't just downloading data into the reader's minds.
They aren't just lecturing them.
Right. The author reflects with the congregation. They are analyzing their shared situation together, much like a coach and a team sitting in that film room.
Okay, so to understand how this works mechanically, we could look at a cycle of learning by doing, right? Like the one proposed by G. Gibbs.
Yes, the Gibbs cycle. This cycle presents a continuous loop involving 6 distinct phases.
Let's walk through those. First is description, right?
Yeah, description, just simply asking what happened.
Okay, and the second phase?
Feelings. What were the participants thinking or feeling during the event?
Got it. Then the third is evaluation.
Right, asking what was good or bad about the experience. You have to weigh the outcomes.
And fourth is analysis, which is making sense of it all.
Yeah, figuring out the why. Fifth is the conclusion, like what else could have been done.
And finally, the sixth phase is an action plan. How should the situation be handled moving forward?
You've got it. It's a continuous loop of learning.
This is a really clear diagnostic tool. But before we map that specific cycle onto the text of Hebrews, we need to talk about the patient.
The congregation itself.
Yeah. Who are we diagnosing here? What specific crisis were they reflecting on?
The audience is quite specific, actually. We are likely looking at a house church, or maybe a small network of house churches.
Made up of Jewish Christians, right?
Yes. And a strong consensus points to them being located in Rome.
Okay, Rome in the first century, that's a tense place to be.
Very tense. Now, some scholars try to get even more specific based on the themes of the letter.
Like Philip E. Hughes, I think.
Right. He suggests these believers might have been converted priests or perhaps individuals associated with the Qumran sect.
Oh, because of their heavy interest in angels and Moses.
And the figure of Melchizedek. The author spends a lot of time on those topics.
But regardless of their exact background, The undeniable fact is that they are Jewish converts to Christianity who are severely faltering.
They are struggling big time. And a compelling theory by Barnabas Lindars about why they are faltering suggests the congregation was dealing with an intense psychological and theological crisis regarding post-baptismal sin.
Post-baptismal sin, meaning they sinned after they were baptized.
Yes. The theory suggests they assumed they would remain perfectly sinless from the moment of their baptism until Christ's return.
Wow, that is a heavy expectation to place on yourself.
It is. And as time passed, reality set in. They messed up. They sinned.
Right.
And when they did, they felt massive crushing guilt. You have to put yourself in their shoes and remember their background in Judaism.
Having left Judaism, they lacked a physical temple.
Exactly. They no longer had a Day of Atonement ritual to cleanse their consciences.
That is a massive psychological shift that modern people might struggle to grasp.
Oh, totally.
If you grew up with a sacrificial system, there is a visceral, sensory reality to forgiveness.
You see the sacrifice, you smell the incense. Well, you experience it all physically.
Yeah, you know that the ritual has been completed by a certified priest, and you walk away feeling a tangible sense of cleanness.
But now, they're in a house church.
There is no altar. There is no physical sacrifice. When the guilt creeps in, they have no physical mechanism to relieve it.
They're just sitting in a dimly lit Roman apartment, wondering if they are still forgiven. It's a terrifying headspace.
So how does that lack of relief manifest? It has to show up somehow.
It does, and it manifests in some very specific, dangerous symptoms. Paul Ellingworth did a linguistic analysis of the original Greek verbs here.
Okay, what did he find?
He reveals 3 distinct categories of symptoms taking root in this congregation: passive, active, and external.
Let's start with the passive ones.
Passively, the text says they are drifting. They are neglecting the faith, losing confidence, and becoming sluggish.
Sluggish, like spiritual lethargy.
Yeah. They're remaining children in the faith, refusing to mature, and they are dropping out of church gatherings altogether.
You know, the passive verbs are so subtle. It is the difference between letting a boat slowly drift off course while you sleep versus actively throwing the steering wheel overboard.
That's a spot-on analogy. You don't always notice a drift until you are miles out to sea.
You just stop showing up. You stop reading. You stop caring.
Right. But then you have the active rebellion.
What does that look like?
Actively, they are displaying outright unbelief. They are allowing a root of bitterness to grow within the community.
Bitterness is a community killer.
It really is. And the author warns them about the danger of holding Christ up to public disgrace and trampling the Son of God underfoot.
Yikes. That's aggressive.
These are not passive actions. This is a deliberate turning away, a hostile rejection of the faith they once professed.
And then you add the external symptoms amplifying everything.
Right. They face state pressure, they have endured public insults, and the confiscation of their property.
So they are losing their homes and businesses.
Yeah, and they face the very real threat of further physical suffering for their confession of Christ.
So you have external persecution pushing down on them, passive drifting causing them to slide away, and active bitterness taking root inside their hearts.
It is a perfect storm of a pastoral crisis.
This brings us to the central mystery of this deep dive. I want to push back on the premise here.
Okay, go for it.
If I am burned out, if my friends are being arrested, and if I feel crushing guilt every time I make a mistake, the absolute last thing I want is a dense theological lecture.
That is entirely fair.
I want a nap. I want a simpler schedule. I want a hug. Why wouldn't a heavy lecture just alienate these people further?
That is the natural modern assumption, right? We assume that tired people need light things.
Yeah, milk, not meat.
But the author of Hebrews takes a completely different, calm, diagnostic approach. The author does not panic.
They acknowledge the external pressure is real.
Yes, but the leader recognizes that the internal vulnerability is the actual lethal threat.
The weariness makes them vulnerable.
Precisely. The congregation is weary and discouraged, making them incredibly susceptible to strange teachings.
Because they want an easy out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They are tempted to return to a more ritualistic faith, like their former Judaism, simply to find relief from their guilty consciences. They want a quick fix.
And the leader's strategy to prevent that is completely unexpected. Thomas Long's analysis on this is fantastic.
Yeah, it really highlights how counterintuitive this all is.
The author doesn't give him a pep talk or a new organizational strategy.
No. Faced with severe spiritual weariness, The author does not turn to improved group dynamics. They do not organize snappy, engaging worship services, and they do not implement modern conflict management techniques.
Instead, they plunge them into high Christology.
Right. They use complex theological preaching about the nature of Jesus Christ to solve a practical pastoral problem of weariness.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This goes back to our mechanic analogy.
Handing out the physics textbook.
Yeah. When someone complains their car is stalling, giving them a college-level physics textbook seems crazy. You would think you should just clean the spark plugs.
Or change the oil.
But the author goes right to the physics textbook. Why does throwing heavy theology at a tired congregation actually work?
What's fascinating here is that superficial fixes only address symptoms. A pep talk might make you feel better for an afternoon, but it does not heal a shattered worldview.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg.
Yeah. The preacher knows that floating around on the surface will not cure a deep systemic sickness. Going to the hidden depths of theology generates surprise, gratitude, and obedience.
It resets their reality.
Completely. It resets the foundation of the listener's reality. There is a concept in Michael Quick's book, 360-Degree Leadership, that argues the separation of leadership and preaching actually harms the church.
Because when you separate the two, you get dysfunction. How does that dysfunction play out?
Without preaching, leadership becomes purely humanistic. It flattens spiritual paradoxes and relies entirely on corporate management techniques.
So the church just becomes another nonprofit organization trying to optimize its volunteer hours.
Right, it loses its soul. On the flip side, without leadership, preaching lacks realism.
Because the preacher isn't in the trenches with the people.
Exactly. It avoids conflict, ignores the actual pain of the congregation, and becomes totally abstract.
But the author of Hebrews fuses the two together perfectly.
They are leading through preaching. They confront the gritty reality of the faltering church by plunging them into the deep end of who Jesus is.
So the theology is heavy.
Yeah.
But the delivery method determines whether an exhausted congregation will actually listen.
Delivery is everything.
Because if you are tired, a dry lecture is just going to put you to sleep. How do you keep them awake for a theoretical physics lecture?
Well, Hebrews is not a dry lecture. It is essentially a sermon. The text itself calls it a word of exhortation.
It was designed to be read aloud to the gathered church, right?
Yes. It is characterized by a conversational style, high energy, and the constant use of present tenses. It grabs the ear and refuses to let go.
Let's talk about the cognitive psychology of this text. I want to look at the rhythm of the sermon, because Fred Craddock points out a brilliant structural observation here.
The alternating rhythm.
Yeah. The text alternates strictly between exposition and exhortation.
Exposition being the theological explanation, the heavy lifting of facts.
And exhortation being the practical application, the urgent call to action.
This rhythm is constant.
Yeah.
Fact, application. Fact, application.
You see this in the specific rhetorical devices used.
Like the word therefore.
Yeah, therefore appears 16 times in the address, and 12 of those times it is used to apply the teaching directly to the listeners.
The author also uses inclusive, active phrases to pull the audience in.
What kind of phrases?
You hear things like, let us draw near, let us hold unswervingly and see to it.
Imagine sitting in a crowded first-century living room hearing this read aloud. It's rhythmic. It's urgent.
It's an active plea.
Why does alternating between here is a fact and here's what we must do about it change the listener's reception? What is happening in their brains?
It prevents the brain from zoning out. It creates a classic dialogue between knowledge and practice.
So they can't just passively listen.
No, the author carries the audience along logically, refusing to let the theology remain abstract for even a moment.
Every high concept demands an immediate, practical response.
You cannot just sit back and say, wow, what a beautiful thought. The text forces you to ask, if this thought is true, how must I alter my life today?
Let's map that reflective cycle we discussed earlier directly onto a hypothetical member of this congregation.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's call him Marcus, a tired, beaten-down Jewish believer in Rome. The cycle includes description, feelings, evaluation, analysis, conclusion, and an action plan.
We can walk Marcus right through it. First, description and feelings.
How does the text address that?
The author addresses Marcus's weary feelings directly. The text talks about their feeble arms, their weak knees, and feeling heavily burdened.
So the author is validating their lived experience.
Fully validating it.
The leader is looking at Marcus and saying, I see that you are exhausted. I am not going to pretend you are fine.
Then comes the evaluation phase. And here, the author offers no saccharine assurances.
They aren't sugarcoating it.
Not at all. The author doesn't pat Marcus on the back and say, don't worry, the persecution will probably blow over by Tuesday.
No false hope.
Right. The evaluation is that Christianity is tough. The author points to the heroes of the faith in chapter 11, showing that every single one of them suffered.
And Jesus himself suffered outside the city gates.
Exactly. Experiencing hardship does not mean Marcus is doing something wrong. It confirms the genuineness of his discipleship.
That shifts the perspective so much. Then we hit the analysis phase.
And this is the core of the entire letter.
This is where the heavy theology comes in to answer the burning question in Marcus's mind. Did I get it wrong?
Marcus is looking at his suffering, looking at his guilt, and wondering if his old religion was right after all.
He is wondering if Christianity is a betrayal of his ancestral faith.
Yes. And the author's analysis hinges on one specific Greek word, kriton, which translates to better.
That word is the theme song of the entire letter. Donald Guthrie points that out, right?
He does. The author systematically proves that Christ is superior. He is better than every single element of the Jewish religion Marcus is tempted to return to.
Let's list some of those out. Christ is superior to angels.
Because angels are just messengers, but Christ is the Son.
He is superior to Moses.
Because Moses was a servant in God's house, but Christ is the builder of the house.
He is superior to the Levitical priests.
Because they constantly died and had to be replaced, but Christ lives forever.
He is superior to the physical tabernacle. He is superior to Melchizedek. He offers a better covenant, better promises, and a better sacrifice.
It is a relentless drumbeat of better, better, better.
The text mentions how the blood of Christ cries out better things than the blood of Abel.
That's such a striking image.
Let's use a modern legal analogy to understand the weight of this.
Okay.
It is the difference between hiring a paralegal to report a crime versus finding out the Supreme Court justice has already signed your full pardon.
I love that.
Abel's blood is the paralegal.
Yep.
It cries out from the ground demanding justice. It reports the error of murder to the court.
Right.
But Christ's blood is a Supreme Court justice. It cries out offering grace. It legally fixes the error and issues the pardon.
It upgrades the entire system.
So how does realizing Christianity is a fulfillment, rather than a betrayal of their old faith, change Marcus's perspective?
It changes the entire landscape of his reality. The realization that Christ's objective work is finished outside of the believer is the key here.
Finished. That's a crucial word.
Very. The text heavily stresses that after Christ offered his single sacrifice, he sat down at the right hand of God.
And you only sit down when the work is completely done.
Exactly. The Levitical priests never sat down because their work was never finished. There were no chairs in the tabernacle.
Wow. This completely solves the post-baptismal sin crisis, causing Marcus so much guilt.
It eradicates it. He does not need a new earthly ritual. He does not need to feel guilty that he lacks a physical temple in Rome.
Because he has a permanent, superior high priest who has already finished the work of atonement.
So that leads us to the final stages of the cycle, the conclusion and the action plan.
The conclusion is that the fault is not in the Christian faith, but in their tardy discipleship.
Right. They haven't fully grasped the sheer magnitude of what Christ has objectively accomplished.
So the action plan is clear and pointed. Eat solid food.
Stop acting like spiritual infants who only want milk.
Keep meeting together, even when it is dangerous. And above all, fix your eyes entirely on Jesus.
It brings all that soaring theology down to a very practical to-do list.
Christ is the ultimate superior high priest. He's the one who finishes the work. But that creates a fascinating dynamic for the local church.
How so?
Well, if Christ does everything, if his sacrifice is once for all, how does that dictate the way human leaders operate on the ground?
Hebrews actually has quite a bit to say about the leaders in the local church.
It uses a very specific Greek term, right? Hegumenoi.
Yes, hegumenoi.
That is a secular term, isn't it?
It is. It is a word commonly used for military leaders, provincial governors, or even pagan priests.
Which completely refutes the modern, overly spiritualized notion that the New Testament entirely avoids secular leadership language.
Some modern churches push back against organizational structures or clear lines of authority.
They claim the early church was just a fluid gathering of friends.
But Hebrews has no problem taking a secular word for a commander and applying it directly to church leaders.
I can hear people cringing at that.
Oh, for sure.
Modern churches often hate military language applied to pastoral care. They reject the CEO model of leadership, yet here is a biblical text using a word associated with military commanders.
But the text qualifies how that command actually works.
Let's break down the references to leaders in chapter 13 because they paint a nuanced picture of authority.
First, it speaks of past leaders. It says they spoke the word of God.
So they were evangelists and teachers, not just managers or administrators.
Right, and they function as models of faith to imitate. Their primary focus was delivering the truth of the gospel.
Then you have present leaders. The congregation is told to obey and submit to them.
But the Greek word for obey is pythos.
Pythist. What does that imply about the nature of their authority?
The word indicates an obedience won through persuasive conversation.
Persuasive conversation. Not authoritarian, peremptory commands.
Exactly. These leaders keep watch over souls like shepherds, and they do so knowing they will have to give a strict account to God for how they led.
It's like a ship navigating a dangerous storm. A ship needs a captain, not just a committee where everyone votes on which way to turn the wheel while the waves are crashing over the bow.
Right, you need a single voice of direction.
But this captain leads by persuasion, not by threatening the crew with a lash. How does a leader maintain actual authority while relying purely on persuasive conversation?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, they maintain authority not by flexing their own muscles or demanding blind loyalty, but by tethering their arguments entirely to the truth of Scripture.
They are accountable servants.
Yes, they manage tension and false teachings, but they do so humbly, knowing they are under authority themselves.
The pastor has zero authority in his own person. His authority is entirely derived from the word of God he preaches.
When he speaks the text accurately, Christ is leading the church. When he speaks his own opinions, he has no authority at all.
And there's a clear distinction made in the text between the leaders and the rest of the congregation.
Yes, the final reference in chapter 13 distinguishes between leaders and all the Lord's people.
It shows the church is not a purely egalitarian group without distinct roles.
There is a mutual ministry of encouragement among everyone in the pews, but there is still a specific, ordained role for those called to direct the church persuasively.
Human leaders persuade and guide up to a limit. But there is a strict boundary they must never cross in their pastoral pair.
That boundary is priesthood.
Human leaders in the new covenant are never considered a new class of priests.
Never. There is only one high priest, and that is Jesus Christ.
Paul Illingworth brings up an amazing insight here. The sole priesthood of Christ doesn't remove the need for pastoral leadership, but it completely changes the job description.
It means that leadership is exercised by a group pointing to a finished sacrifice.
They are not offering new sacrifices to appease God's wrath.
And they are not acting as mediators between God and the congregation.
The book of Hebrews introduces the concept of Jesus as the archegos,
which translates to the pioneer, the founder, or the forerunner.
He is the one who forged the path through suffering to complete salvation. So, what does this all mean? Let's use a medical analogy here.
Okay, lay it on me.
A human leader is like the physical therapist helping you walk after a major surgery. They guide you, they push you, and they help you recover.
But Christ is the surgeon who actually performed the life-saving open-heart operation.
Exactly. You don't ask the physical therapist to crack open your chest and operate.
Right, they don't have the tools, the skill, or the authority.
Or think of it like a jungle expedition. Human leaders are like the trail guides handing out maps, but Christ is the one with the machete who actually hacked the path through the impenetrable jungle.
Recognizing Christ as the archegos removes the unbearable pressure from human leaders.
They do not have to save the congregation.
If a leader thinks they are the priest, if they think they are the surgeon, they will burn out trying to mediate for everyone.
They will carry a weight they were never designed to carry.
But if they know they are just the physical therapist, they only have to point the congregation back to the one who already performed the successful operation.
So Hebrews provides this highly structured, massive theological sermon to cure weariness and burnout.
It's heavy, heavy meat.
But the source material also offers a brief, necessary comparison with another letter, the book of James.
Right.
We have been talking about a tired, beaten down congregation that needs to see the superiority of Christ. But what about a congregation that isn't weary?
What if they are just lazy, comfortable, and half-hearted?
Yeah. James is fascinating because it addresses a completely different pastoral problem.
Historically, James has been dismissed by some theologians as doctrinally lightweight.
It has been treated as just a practical handbook for Christian living, supposedly devoid of systemic theology.
Why do we have this tendency to look down on practical instruction?
Why do we assume that if a sermon is highly practical, it must not be theological?
People often create a false dichotomy between thinking and doing. We assume the intellectuals write the theology and the managers write the practical application.
But scholars like Patrick Harton and Douglas Moo, who analyzed James, place it firmly in the wisdom tradition of Israel.
It acts as a necessary bridge between the ethics of the Old Testament and the realities of the New Testament,
And it is heavily influenced by the actual words of Jesus.
particularly the Sermon on the Mount.
It is thoroughly saturated with the teachings of Jesus. It offers essential practical divinity.
Theology without practice is useless, dead orthodoxy.
James shows that true, objective belief always results in a radically changed style of life.
So we have two different tools for two different pastoral problems.
Hebrews uses soaring Christology to cure the burnout of an exhausted, persecuted church.
While James uses punching, practical wisdom to cure the half-heartedness of a comfortable, lazy church.
Giving the book of James to the Hebrews congregation would crush them.
Oh, absolutely. They are already feeling guilty and beaten down. Hitting them with strict moral demands would break them entirely.
But giving the book of Hebrews to the James congregation might just make them fatter and lazier.
They would listen to the high theology, nod their heads in intellectual agreement, and go right back to ignoring the poor and gossiping about their neighbors.
The genius of pastoral leadership is knowing which sickness you are dealing with and applying the correct text.
James asks the hard, diagnostic questions about how your stated faith changes the way you treat the poor, how you use your tongue, and how you handle your money.
It refuses to let theology stay in the clouds.
The author of Hebrews acts as the ultimate reflective practitioner for a specific type of crisis.
They saw a faltering, weary congregation drifting away.
But instead of curing spiritual burnout with gimmicks or emotional manipulation, they cured it with...
The church is guided by leaders who persuade rather than dictate. And those leaders constantly point the people away from their own efforts and back to the one true high priest.
The brilliance of Hebrews is that it respects the intellect and the spiritual capacity of the weary listener.
It says, I know you're tired. I know you are terrified of the state. I know you feel immense guilt over your failures.
But the cure for your fatigue is not a lighter schedule.
No, it is a bigger, heavier vision of who Jesus is.
This raises a massive question about how we handle weariness today. We are conditioned to seek the path of least resistance whenever we feel overwhelmed.
I will leave you with a final thought to chew on. Think about your own seasons of spiritual fatigue. Are you drifting passively, slowly letting the boat off course?
Or are you actively building resentment against the people around you?
Are you trying to fix that exhaustion with superficial changes? Changing the style of music you listen to, switching to a more entertaining church, or downloading a new religious productivity app?
If the early church combated severe burnout, state trauma, and crushing guilt by giving the congregation heavier, more difficult theological concepts to digest.
What does that say about our modern instinct to constantly simplify and water down information whenever we feel overwhelmed?
It's challenging.
Remember that mechanic we talked about at the beginning? When your engine is smoking and stalling out, maybe the answer isn't a fresh coat of paint or a simpler dashboard.
Maybe the answer is a rigorous look at the physics of the engine itself.
Keep reflecting. Keep examining the tape. See you next time.